most important thing that we're doing is we're working with a group of leading brands who've signed a memorandum of understanding with us to really look at what are the driving factors behind the lack of living wages for garment workers.
And why are you working with brands on this?
Well, we found that we looked at why individual brand efforts and individual factory efforts were not actually leading to living wages. And what we found, and I think everybody understands this quite well, is that this is a structural issue. It's not that something that can be solved on a factory by factory basis or a brand by brand basis. What we need to do is bring all of the industry together and say, how can we drive up wages across the board? And that was the foundation of thinking behind the ACT process. And we recognised that in order to do that, there are two key elements. One is the creation of sectoral collective bargaining in order to provide a mechanism that will actually pay workers a higher wage, and to link that mechanism directly to the purchasing practices of the brands.
So by linking the purchasing practices, are individual brands going to be purchasing in the same way?
What we need to do is we really need to transform the way that purchasing is done for the garment industry, because at the moment it's the lowest common denominator that is putting the pressure on wages. We see that factories are competing to offer the best product at the cheapest price in the shortest time frame to the brands, and that is not enabling workers to earn a higher wage. So we need a mechanism that is going to isolate the wage component from the other costs in a purchasing contract, and that has never been done before, because it requires the brands to be participating and the factories to be participating and the workers themselves to be negotiating.
This is fascinating stuff, and I can see how that could be negotiated in a global way. But what about work on the ground? What have you been up to in country?
Well, our ambition is to bring this to as many garment-producing countries as possible. At the moment, ACT is still in its early stages of development, but one country that we've started to work in is Cambodia. We had a joint visit there, Brands and Industrial, last September. We talked to many suppliers, we talked to the trade unions, and we talked to the government as well about what our vision is of what needs to change. So Cambodia is still likely to be the first country where we start to develop sectoral collective bargaining and linking that to purchasing practices, but is by no means the only country where we will be doing this. This is a model that will have a different way of actually taking place on the ground in each country, but the mechanism will be similar in that it links the way that the garments are purchased to the way that workers are paid.
So how does this play with the more usual discussion that happens on living wages, or has done over the last 10 years, which is all about calculated numbers and how much a living wage should actually be?
Well, that's very much a top-down approach, and as trade unions we believe that the best mechanism for delivering wage outcomes for workers is collective bargaining. What we're seeing is that collective bargaining on a factory-by-factory basis is not likely to be able to drive up wages for workers, because there's not the industrial strength, and it's very difficult for individual factories to be paying significantly more than their competitors. But through industry-wide collective bargaining, you can bring unions collectively to the bargaining table with suppliers, and through that process, it is determined what the appropriate wage should be, taking into account all of the other factors which are not necessarily looked at when national minimum wages are set. So that's why we are not fixated on any particular figure. We believe that this is a figure that's derived through negotiation and through the unions determining what is the best outcome for them and their members.
So how will this play out on the ground? How is it actually going to work?
Well, that needs to be looked at in an individual country situation, because every country is going to have its own traditions, it's going to have its own labour legislation. So what sectoral bargaining looks like can differ from country to country. Some of the elements will be the same, as I say, particularly the link to the purchasing practices, but it is our job as ACT to help drive these developments at country level. And that will be led very much by the local unions, by the factory owners, and we expect that the government will be involved too, where there needs to be work to define a mechanism that will enable the sectoral bargaining to take place where it doesn't currently.